Let's go ahead and do another example of finding the greatest common factor, or GCF, of an algebraic expression. So in this example, we're going to look at the algebraic expression 9x to the fourth times y minus 14x to the sixth. Okay, so just like before, we're going to find the greatest common factor of the coefficients 9 and 14. Yes, we do have a minus sign out in front of here, but that's not really relevant for what we're doing yet, so we don't have to worry about that. It only becomes relevant when we start actually factoring, but for now we're just finding the greatest common factor. Starting in the next section, we'll use the greatest common factor to actually factor, and that's when we have to pay attention to the minus sign. So for now, 9 is 1 times 3 times 3. 14 is 1 times 2 times 7. So what factors do these two guys have in common? Well, they have a factor of 1 in common, and that's actually it. Okay? So 9 has two factors of 3, 14 has no factors of 3, 14 has a factor of 2 and a factor of 7, 9 does not have either of those. So the greatest common factor for the coefficients, 9 and 14 here, is just 1. Okay? Now, how about the variable parts? So here we have x to the fourth times y. So x to the fourth times y is 1 times x times x times x times x times y. And x to the sixth is 1 times x times x times x times 3 more x's. So that's a little tedious, right? Now, that is kind of tedious, and once you get into larger powers, say, for example, if we have x to the 34th or x to the 56th, we're certainly not going to want to write out all 56 or all 34 factors of x there. So there is a little shortcut we can do, and I'll cover that at the end of this video. But for now, let's look at what factors these guys have in common. So they have a factor of 1 in common. Here's one factor of x they have in common. Another factor of x in common. Yet another factor of x in common. And one more factor of x in common. Now, x to the fourth y has a factor of y. X to the sixth does not. X to the sixth has two more factors of x, but this guy up here, x to the fourth y, has none left. So what they have in common then, or their greatest common factor then, is 1 times x times x times x times x, which is just x to the fourth. Okay, so then overall, the greatest common factor of the entire algebraic expression is this 1 times that x to the fourth, which is just x to the fourth. Okay, so the greatest common factor of the entire algebraic expression is x to the fourth. Okay, now about that shortcut I was talking about. So x to the fourth y, let's come over here and write this off separately. X to the fourth y and x to the sixth. Now, what we can do, instead of writing out each individual power one by one like this, what we can do is look and say, okay, x to the sixth, that's larger than x to the fourth. In other words, the 6, what I should say is 6 is larger than 4. So x to the sixth, there are more factors of x than here than we have in x to the fourth. So what we could do is just write the smaller one as it is, x to the fourth, and y is just y. Only y to the first there's no y here anyway, so we're just focusing on the x's. Now, x to the fourth times y is just x to the fourth times y. And then what we could do down here is say x to the sixth is x to the fourth times x squared. Okay? And we should also put our 1's in there just to be thorough. Okay? So x to the fourth times y is 1 times x to the fourth times y. And x to the sixth is 1 times x to the fourth times x squared. Now, why are we doing that? Well, notice now we can just immediately say, okay, they have a factor of 1 in common, and they have a factor of x to the fourth in common. So then the GCF is 1 times x to the fourth, which is just x to the fourth. Okay? So that saves us a lot of time and trouble doing this versus writing out each individual factor like that. So again, how do we go about doing this? Well, x to the sixth, x to the fourth. The sixth is the larger power, so what we want to do is write this as x to the smaller power multiplied by x to the whatever's left over. Okay, So remember, x to the fourth times x squared, you just add up the exponents like that. That's x to the fourth times x squared equals x to the 4 plus 2, which is x to the sixth. So that's why we split it up like this. X to the sixth equals x to the smaller power multiplied by x to whatever's left over. So we're going to use this little shortcut technique in the upcoming videos whenever it's necessary, because we don't want to keep writing out each individual power like this, because it does get pretty tedious. So anyway, that's this example here. The greatest common factor of 9x to the fourth y minus 14x to the sixth is x to the fourth.